All right, so today we're going to be talking about terminating and repeating decimals. And you understand the concept of decimals. Decimals are parts of a number. If you go ahead and move down through your book a little bit here to this vocabulary startup section, it says any fraction can be expressed as a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. And what they're saying is, if you take any fraction at all, take the fraction 1/2. Take the fraction 1/2. And you divide the 1 by the 2, you get 0.5, which is what the decimal version of 1/2 is. Decimal version of 1/2 is 0.5. By the way, I did that fairly quickly. Let me just go back. 2 doesn't go into 1 at all any times, so there's a 0. We put a decimal up, and then 2 goes into 10 5 times. Now, a repeating decimal is one that has a pattern to it. Notice how in this decimal, right here, the 3's just keep going. That ... tells you that's going to continue forever. We don't have time to write it forever, so the math shorthand for that is to write 0.3, put a bar over the top. Here, 1 2 1 2 ... that means the 1 2 1 2 goes on forever. The bar is over the 1 and the 2 because that's the part that repeats. In this last one, 11.38585 ... 85858585, the bar's only over the 8 and the 5, not the 3, because you notice the 3 doesn't repeat, just the 8 and the 5 repeat. Now, a terminating decimal is a decimal that ends. Let's go ahead and write that here. Terminating means it ends. Like this, 0.5. Notice no ... no line over the top, no more numbers. It just stops. So decimals like 1/2 stop. The decimal for 1/4, 0.25. Done. Stop. Doesn't go any further. The decimal for 7/10, 0.7. Stop. Done. Doesn't go any further. All right, so we'll just do this real quickly. Take a look at these 3. Go ahead and match them up, and then turn the video back on, and we will discuss them. Okay, so here's our matchup. This one, the ones that just keep going, is right here. This one, the 6 and then the ones that keep going, is right here. And finally, the 6 1 6 1 6 1 ... is right there. All right, let's go look at that real-world link. Jamie had 2 hits on her first 9 times at bat. To find her average, she divided 2 by 9. 2 by 9. She got this. Write that using bar notation. So that's the bar notation. When they talk about bar notation, they are talking about that little bar right there. So how would you write that with bar notation? Go ahead. Pause for a minute and write that. All right. Your bar notation should have been 0.2 with a line over it because it's the 2's that keep repeating. Now, round to the nearest thousandth. So anytime you want to round to the nearest thousandth, you look out and you find the thousandths. There's the thousandths right there, that spot right there. And then you look one more place, to the 10,000ths in this case, and you ask yourself, what does this 2 tell us to do to the 1 in the thousandths? Well, it tells us to leave it at 2, and we would have 0.22. To the next page. Let's see if we can get some practice going here. Oh, good, a chance to practice. Write fractions as decimals. 7/10. So they wrote it down 7 over 10, and they got 0.7. That is, by the way, the tenths place right there. And so there's a 7 in the tenths place. All right, 19/100ths. I'm going to write the fraction, and then I want you to write it as a decimal, simplest form decimal. So there's the fraction. Pause the video for a moment. Write that as a decimal. Okay. What you should have had is you should have had 0.19 because that 9 is in the hundredths place. So we can see 19 hundredths. By the way, if you think of money, that's 19 cents. And remember, pennies are 100th of a dollar. So the spot right here, these would be 9 pennies sitting in the hundredths place. All right, last one. 105 thousandths. So I'm going to go ahead and write the fraction, 105 thousandths. Now, I wrote it way over on the right-hand side of the box for a reason, because that can be simplified. And I'm going to let you think about that. 19 hundredths, I stuck that in the middle of the box. 19 is a prime number. You cannot simplify something if it's a prime number. So you can simplify this, though, because this ends in 5, that ends in 0. Think about that. Go ahead and pause, simplify that, and then write its decimal. Okay, your thing to simplify by would have been 5 to start with. So 5 goes into 105, goes into 100 20 times, so it goes into 105 21 times. And 5 into 1,000, well, 5 goes into 120 times. And in 100, there are 10 20s, so that's going to be 200. So we've got 21 200ths. Okay, now it's time to write it as a fraction. Now here's the thing about writing fractions. You can't write a fraction in the 200ths because there aren't 200ths. There are, go ahead and copy this with me. So when you do places, let's just go up and use this spot right here for places. All right, so you've got the decimal point. Let's make the decimal point this nice big red decimal point sitting right here. Now, as you move past that decimal point, you have the ones, and then you have the tens, and you have the hundreds, and the thousands, and the 10,000s. I don't want to put an extra comma there, but you got the 10,000s. And then going back the other direction, you have the tenths and the hundredths. I hope you're writing this in. And the thousandths and the 10,000ths. And we'll do one more, the 100,000ths. I'm going to go one more this way and do the 100,000s. And notice when you go here you've got tens. So think of this one in the decimal place kind of going together here and acting sort of like a balance, or maybe a wall, I don't know. But as you move away from them, you have tens and you have tenths. And you've got hundreds and you have hundredths. And you have thousands and you have thousandths. So if you're trying to remember what these places are called, just look at this place. Go, well, one left of the one is the tens, the one with the decimal. So one right is the tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4 left is the 10,000s. 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right are the 10,000ths. But notice nowhere in there is there 200ths. So this 21 200ths, that's our lowest term fraction. When we want to write this as a decimal, however, we have to go back to 10,000s, and we write it like this. And notice that 5 right there is in that 10,000ths place. All right? So it's 1, 2, 3 places to the right of the decimal. 1, 2, 3 places to the right of the decimal. All right, so they give you some examples, and you can pause the video and read through those examples. Here they show 74 over 100, so they write it as 74 over 100, 74 hundredths. You could simplify that. Let's just do that for practice. 74 over 100. Well, they're both even numbers. Let's start out easily. They're both even numbers, so divide them both by 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50. 74 divided by 2 is 37, and now we're done because that number, 37, is prime. Prime numbers mean the only things that go into it are 1 in itself, so that one's done. Here is an example of how to take this 7/20ths and turn it into something that you can write a decimal for. It has to be in tenths or hundredths or thousandths, so they turned it into hundredths and wrote the decimal. Ignore that. That's a silly place to put a period. It's 0.35. It looks like 2 decimals. You can only have 1 decimal. And then notice how they do it with a mixed number. They split it. They know the 5 is going to end up, get rid of that again, silliness. They know the 5 is going to end up in front of the decimal, in front being to the left, and then they convert the 3/4 into 0.75, and you end up with 5.75. Okay, so go ahead. There are 3 got it problems. Pause the video, do those 3 got it problems, turn it back on, and we'll discuss. First got it problem, 3/10. Well, the tenths place, let's go back to this chart that we drew. Notice the tenths place is the first one to the right. So we need the 3 in that spot. First one to the right. So our answer is right there, 3/10. 3/25. So you've got 3 over 25. Can that go into 10 evenly? No. Can it go into 100 evenly? You bet. You bet. 25 times 4 makes 100. So 3 times 4. 3 times 4 is 12. And so we've got 12 100ths. Take a look at this table of things. Look at all of those. And we want the hundredths. That's the decimal, 1 place, 2 places. So the 2 from 12 has to be in that spot. And we end up with 12 hundredths. And then -6.5. Well, we can start our answer. It's going to have a -6 and a decimal point because the 6 wholes don't change. The half is equal to the decimal 0.5. So we bring that down and combine, and we get 6.5. This 0 in the ones place gets replaced by the 6 in the ones place, and then 0.5. So we have -6.5. That is our answer to that one. This was our answer to this one. All right, let's take a look at the next example they give us. Okay, so they give us a few more examples, right? 3/8 as a decimal. It's going to be the 3 divided by the 8. You get 0.375. They're showing long division here. We're going to use calculators on something like this. We're not practicing long division. We're practicing, can we take a decimal from a fraction? Then you've got, write the -1/40th as a decimal. You're dividing 1 by 40. Notice they don't put a negative sign on either one of these. They know if this is a negative answer, then its decimal form is a negative answer. And then finally, write 7/9. Notice what happens when you do ninths. You get this repeating seventh. What do you think 8/9 is? You want to make a guess at what you think 8/9 is? Well, let's look. 8 divided by 9. Oh, look at that, repeating 8s. That 9 right there, by the way, it's only a 9 because they had to round at the end. If that wasn't there, if they weren't rounding, these 8s would just keep going forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. What do you think 4/9? 4 divided by 9 is, huh? 4/9? What do you think? You got it. 4s all the way along. Okay, so let's try some got it problems now. Here are 4 of them. What I'd like you to do is do D and E and then stop. Watch the video for D and E and then come back and do F and G. All right, so I've got my calculator out. I'm going to do 7/8. Now I'm going to go ahead before I even change it. I'm going to write an equal sign and put a negative sign because I know it's a negative. I also know it's less than 1, so I can put a 0 and a decimal. And then I'm going to divide 7 by 8, and I get 875. So negative 7/8 is the same as negative 0.875. Number 2, let's clear that so it's ready for us. Letter E, 2 1/8. Again, put the 2, put a decimal, because the whole number never changes. If you have 2.5 as a fraction, you're going to have 2.5 as a decimal. Then divide the 1 by the 8, and we get 0. Whoops, we don't need the 0. That was where the 2 is. We get 1.125. So 2.125 is the same as 2 1/8. All right, pause again, do those last 2, and then turn it back on to hear the answer. Okay, negative 3/11. Well, again, I can put in a negative sign. That's less than 0, so I can put a 0 in. 3 divided by 11 is 0.272727. Oh, that's going to keep repeating, so I've got 0.27 and a line over the 27. 8 1/3. Well, again, I know the whole number is going to be 8, so 8 point something. So it's just the 1/3 that I have to figure out. 1 divided by 3, 1 divided by 3 right there is, and it is 3's that repeat. So that's 8.3 with a line over the top. Okay, let's take a look. I think there's one more quick example. Find the fraction of fish in an aquarium that are goldfish, right? Simplest form. So they tell us goldfish are 0.15. That's the amount. So we want 0.15. So that's 15 hundredths. 15 over 100. And 15 over 100 can be simplified to 3 over 20. And they just wrote it there like you'll automatically know how to do that. Let's just put it right up here. 15 over 100. Well, 3 goes into both of those. So we're going to take that and we're going to divide by 3 on the top and the bottom. So they wrote that just like 15 hundredths becomes 3/20. Let's look at how they got it. So they had 15 hundredths. So you ask yourself, what goes into 15 and into 100? Well, 5 does. Anything that ends in 5 and 0 can be divided by 5. So 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. And that's how they converted to 3/20. All right, let's check out their got it problem. Determine the fraction of the aquarium made up of each fish. Write the answer in simplest form. All right, so we've got to go back to where we can see that. We did the goldfish. They want the molly, the guppy, the angelfish. So go ahead, pause the video, solve those 3, and then turn it back on. Okay, for the molly, it's 2/10. So it's 2/10. They want it in simplest form. 2/10. 2 goes into both of those, so divide everything by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. The simplest form for the mollies are 1/5. Now, pause if you weren't sure how to do that, but now you know before you do the guppies. All right, 0.25, that's probably one that many of you remember. So that's 25 hundredths. 25 goes into 25 once. 25 goes into 100 4 times. So this is is 1/4. And finally, the angelfish, well, they were 4/10. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 goes into 10 5 times. They are 2/5. Okay, we've got some guided practice. So now what you need to do is you need to pause and do the 4 problems, 1 through 4 here. Do those for practice, then turn the video back on. Check your answers. Okay, let's go through these 3 practice problems and then down to the word practice problem. So 2/5. So we know that's going to be 2 divided by 5. So 2 divided by 5 is 0.4. So it will be 0.4. And that's terminating. Go ahead and write that here. That's a terminating. Gosh, my pen is going crazy right now. Let me get rid of that and start again. That's a terminating decimal. It means it stops. So anytime something is terminating, it means it ends. All right. Now, another way that you could have done that 2/5 without a calculator is you could have said, well, there's 2/5. I have to get it to equal tenths or hundreds or thousands. And it actually will equal tenths. 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 2 is 4. Now we've got 4/10. Same answer. -9/10. Again, in the tenths place. First thing I can do without doing any computation is I can put a negative sign in, because if it's a negative fraction, it's a negative decimal. And then I have the 9/10. So it's less than 1, which means it starts with a 0, and then the 9. Finally, 5/9. Well, again, less than 1 whole, so I can put a decimal. Mathematicians always put a 0 out front. If you don't have that 0, it's not wrong, but it really helps highlight the fact that there's a decimal going on here. So put that 0 decimal point and then 5/9, and you remember anytime you had those ninths, let's get the calculator out to prove that, but anytime you had those ninths, it just kept going. Now, you might find that when we actually do this division, yeah, see that 6 right there? But that 6 is only because they rounded. If it said to you, round to the nearest tenth or the hundredth or the thousandth, you'd end up with that 6. But when it just says write it as a decimal, it goes on forever. That bar notation right there tells you it goes on forever. All right, and number 4. During a hockey game, an ice resurfacer travels 0.57 miles. That's a Zamboni, by the way. What fraction represents this distance? Well, if you take 0.75, that is 75 hundredths. 25, I'll actually show you the division. 25 goes into both of those. 75 divided by 25 is 3. 100 divided by 25 is 4. It went 3/4 of a mile. Okay, so that's your work. Go ahead and check those out. Bring your questions to class because we're going to be doing practice on this tomorrow.